FiLiA means daughter. We are the daughters of the women who came before us, and we fight so that our daughters may be free. We are a women-led volunteer organization. Our vision is a world free from patriarchy, where all women and girls are liberated. We seek to contribute to the women's liberation movement by building sisterhood and solidarity among women, locally, nationally, and globally. By amplifying the voices of women, particularly those less often heard or purposefully silenced, and by defending women's human rights.
So good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel. On the occasion of Mother Earth Day, FiLiA is hosting this panel focusing on feminist and ecological politics.
We'll just introduce our guests now. So the first woman of today's panel is Farida Akhter. And Farida is a women's movement activist, a writer, and a leading exponent of biodiversity-based ecological agriculture. Farida is the co-founding organizer of Naya Krishi Andolan, a biodiversity-based farmers movement in Bangladesh.
Our second guest of today is Dr. Vandana Shiva. She's a physicist, ecologist, feminist, activist, and the founder of Navdanya, a movement for biodiversity conservation and farmers' rights. She is also the founder and director of the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Natural Resources.
And our final panelist is Susan Hawthorne. She's a writer, a poet, a political commentator, and a publisher. She has been involved in the women's liberation movement since 1973. Susan has notably worked in Aboriginal education and taught English to Arabic-speaking women. She also founded Spinifex Press in 1991. Susan was also a speaker at our annual FiLiA conference in 2019.
So today our first question is, how is environmental destruction related to patriarchy, and why and in what ways are women more impacted by environmental destruction? Farida, would you like to go first?
Thank you very much. Thank you, FiLiA, for organizing this wonderful discussion webinar today. And I'm glad in your question, you mentioned environmental destruction and not degradation. The word destruction is notionally patriarchal as against creation, regeneration, and transformation. The destruction we are talking about is not only of nature and life, visible or invisible life forms, animate or inanimate natural objects, but the destruction of the very conditions of existence in general. The culprit, the destroyer, the degrader always remains unnamed, that is capital or corporations. The blame is shifted to the people who are accused of environmental degradation. People become pests. The premise of the capitalist patriarchy is war, conquest, and privatization of nature. It is often expressed in ideologies claiming human beings should conquer nature, initially through privatization and in the modern era through science and technology. The fossil fuel-based industrial civilization had made us alien to nature. Agriculture has become industrial food production, losing all the sensuous charm of feeling and belonging to nature, mirroring the paradigm, design, and systems of factory. Factory has replaced the diverse and complex landscapes and process of multiple flows and regenerative process of nature. War and industrial killings have become the rules of the age because industrial lifestyles depend on oil and gas. In the oil-rich countries, we have seen in the Middle East countries, not only thousands and millions of lives are lost, but the entire environment is destroyed. These are the meanings of conquering the world by men. Killer technologies are used in agriculture and these cause environmental destruction. Let me give you some practices in modern agriculture or the green revolution. For example, they use chemical fertilizer and pesticide. Patriarchy is expressed in the language of murder, and you can see in the pesticide, the part side actually means killing. Killing is legitimized as normal practice in daily language. Of course, life forms are interdependent. There is a food chain. They balance each other, and the farmers should also manage pests. But the idea to kill insects or pests rather than managing them in a milieu of ecological interdependence, the language and practice of patriarchy has profound effects on ethics and morality of life. For example, I went to a village in India, Hyderabad, and I asked a farmer what do you do to kill pests? In fact, I asked him that way. He answered, "Unka bhi to hak hai." Those also have the right to food. And similar response of women in Bangladesh when I asked about brinjal, that what do you do to kill insects? They said, "Do you do anything to kill insects?" They said, "Yes, we do." I said, "What?" They said, "Ashes." So why not pesticide? They feel it's morally unacceptable. We don't have to kill. We should only turn them away. If there are problems, we think there is something wrong in our own practices. We don't have to kill them. And as you are asking, whether women are impacted by environmental destruction, yes, women are very much impacted. They have been involved in management of soil, water, forest, energy, and biodiversity. And environmental destruction disrupts her role and dislocates her from knowledge of the natural environment. Environmental destruction has direct impact on health. Women are the first to suffer from the effects of pesticides. Last thing to say is that the monoculture and the seed preservation that women are destroyed by these technologies, and pesticide has created infertility, and then they start technologies for infertility, and then it becomes another business of the corporations. Thank you.
Hello, and happy Mother Earth Day.
Thank you.
All. And can you imagine how different the world would be if we realized and stayed awake to the fact that we are all children of Mother Earth and organized our politics and our democracies and our economies and our science and our technologies according to the rights of Mother Earth and the laws of Mother Earth? We wouldn't have the ecocide and genocide we are facing. But it's only in the last 400 or 500 years that we have had a system organized for ecocide and genocide. And we destroyed all the bricks. We removed all the bricks. And that was the civilizing mission of colonialism. Maria Mies and I have called this anti-nature, anti-women, and anti-life ideology of colonizing commerce as capitalist patriarchy. And it's based on the assumption that nature is dead matter. Women are passive objects with no creativity, no intelligence, no autonomy, no agency, no subjecthood. It's a worldview and a system of knowledge, as well as a means to organize trade and commerce. It's been institutionalized very carefully, very, very calculatedly over the last few centuries. There's no evolutionary trajectory to it. There's a violent imposition of it. And fossil fuels and fossil fuel colonialism and colonization and the rule of violence, greed, and destruction of nature and cultures is at the heart of it. But sadly, this very manipulative, clever mind, while it works out how to take everything away from nature, from women, from peasants, from tribals, it also creates these boxes of separation in our thinking. And so we don't see interrelated phenomena as interrelated. The feminist movement, by and large, ignores the fact that the first woman who's being violated is Mother Earth. And our sisterhood has to be a sisterhood or the planetary, in a planetary consciousness. So of course there's the urge to colonize. The Vasco da Gamas and the Columbuses were there, but the organized capitalist patriarchy can be marked to 1600, when the East India Company was formed. And what this did was the patriarch, the greedy, irresponsible, rich, 300 individuals of England or Europe got together and went to the Queen and said, give us these powers. The most ancient farmers of the world, their farming heritage was denied to them. Their land was denied to them. They were called Bushmen, when they are the best gardeners of the world, who have gardened for 60,000 years on the same land and not destroyed it. I think the Aboriginal farming and agriculture is the missing piece in our understanding of our relationship with the earth. A very important part of capitalist patriarchy is a construction of male form to create limited liability and then declare everything theirs. The latest of this is Bill Gates. Today, they're meeting in America, solutions to the climate problem. This is the rubbish they'll be implementing. It is the latest project of capitalist patriarchy. We're a handful of billionaires, you can count them on your fingertips. They're now trillionaires. These trillionaires got rich by deregulation, which was recolonization. And now they want to colonize the world in the name of saving the earth. They don't use the word earth. They're scared of nature. They're scared of the earth as living systems. So they're co-opting the word nature. They don't use the word earth because that means she's living. And now they've created a whole new vocabulary. I've just done a piece for today. Please go to the Navdanya website and you'll find 2 sets of reports. One we wrote for Women's Day, which is Earth Rising, Women Rising. And it's our work on agriculture, very much like Farida's work in Bangladesh, saving seeds, doing agroecology, doing local trade. You know, they are assuming that every piece of food will be manipulated and moved on container ships, and they call it supply chains. No, in nature, there's a web of life. In nature, there's a food web. Supply chains are the linear extractive colonial system of take, 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 take. In our land, what was one land, Farida's and mine, 60 million people were pushed to famine, not because they weren't growing enough rice or enough food, but it was being extracted for profits and trade. The Great Reset of the World Economic Forum is basically take over every public institution that was created to protect the earth, environmental laws, protect human rights, workers' rights, labor rights, women's rights, just get rid of them and hijack the UN system and hijack all governments. It's happened to the WHO already. It'll happen in October or September for the FAO, where they want to reduce agriculture. You know, we have the path, Navdanya in India, Naya Krishi in Bangladesh. We have the path, we grow more food, we grow more nutrition, we have more biodiversity, we can address climate change. All of this mega crisis of today, we can address through good farming, which I call care for the earth. And it was not counted as work, because anything that will make profits was not work. Women's knowledge was removed. Women's work was treated as non-work. So we are at the point where all knowledges are being erased in the name of artificial intelligence, and all work will be destroyed in the name of robotics and efficiency and digitalization. So what I would request all of you who are listening to do is please follow these trends of the new colonization, the latest stage of capitalist patriarchy. Maria Mies and I, when we wrote our book, Ecofeminism, we said it's a worldview that recognizes that humans are part of nature, not separate from nature. And in their connectedness through life, both nature and women are alive and autonomous, not dead passive objects. And we are going to make the change.
Before I begin, in Australia, we have a protocol, which is a sort of resistance to the terra nullius that was put about when Australia was colonised. And we acknowledge the lands of the Indigenous people on whom we live and work. So, and we also respectfully acknowledge the wisdom and the knowledge of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and their custodianship of the lands and waterways. In the case of Spinifex, we have offices around the country, and they are situated on the land of the Jiru, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Eora and Noongar. And we also acknowledge the history of women who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. And for us, that's a really important part of our resistance to colonisation in Australia. But patriarchy's been around for about 6,000 years. So compared to Aboriginal habitation in Australia, it's really very short. And it's neither universal nor inevitable. And there are societies around the world who are not patriarchal, even though they are surrounded by patriarchal societies. And the problem with patriarchy is it's a hierarchy. And in the contemporary world, the people with the greatest power are men with wealth, mostly white, but not entirely. Along with wealth comes an awful lot of class privilege. The most powerful are also very mobile. They have been able to fly around the world even during the pandemic. Very few of them have debilitating disabilities, and almost none are Indigenous. And when you look at women and the billionaires and trillionaires, there are something like 3,000 male billionaires and maybe 250 women. The problem is that the poorest of the poor across the world are women. And I think that can be seen in the ways in which there are an increasing number of women across countries who are being used as breeders by the rich, entitled baby buyers who believe that they have a right to a child. Now, that's just one way in which it happens. And another way, all women fear being raped. All women can be raped. And there's a lot of fear about rape and sexual violence. And it is really, it's sensible to fear rape and sexual violence. Across the world in 2018, something like 50,000 women were killed by either family members or intimate partners. And, you know, the other thing that patriarchy does is it diminishes almost everything that women do. And Vandana, you referred to that. Basically, if it's a woman's job, it doesn't have as much value. And that's something that women and Indigenous people share, because Indigenous people are also seen as not having any value. And women's achievements are erased, and our traditions are devalued. And as Marilyn Waring said back in 1988, counting for nothing. And because women are more likely to live in poverty, when there are environmental disasters, they are much more likely to be affected. Where they live may be in an area that is polluted in some way or is vulnerable to environmental damage. Their houses are much more likely to be not for set up for things like, say, cyclones and other events. They might live on a floodplain, which means that if there's a flood, they will suffer. The global system is both patriarchal and capitalist, and it's killing all the important things that can sustain people and the planet. And biodiversity is absolutely key among these things. And it's actually a very good example of a system that is self-sustaining, and it's complex, and each part of the system supports another when it's in balance. It's local, it's interdependent, and it survives in the long term. And I think biodiversity really is a counter to globalization. And yeah, and then the other thing is that patriarchy is destroying the environment in multiple ways. War is one of the problems of patriarchy. War is continuous around the world. So one of the great quotes is that from Cynthia Enloe. She wrote, "Masculinity is a foreign policy issue." And I think that that's a really great summary of part of where the world is at the moment, and the way in which the military-industrial complex is ramped up, and it has become universalized in lots of ways. So that will I'll bring in other things later. Thank you.
So now I'd like to move on to Farida. Farida, will you please tell us about your work, particularly about women's role in seed saving and maintaining uncultivated land, and how is it related to the wider destruction of land and surrounding ecology?
Thank you very much. Actually, I will just talk about my work and also my friends who are here with me today, Vandana and Susan. They are also connected to it. So UBINIG is my organization's policy research for development alternative. In '84, we started working on the population control policies, which is imperialist, anti-poor, racist, anti-women, and they were actually imposing this as by World Bank and international institutions and blaming the poor for poverty, food deficit, environmental destruction. So while we were busy with this, and I was invited in some international meetings and where I met Renata Klein, Maria Mies, and then we all formed Feminist International Network for Resistance Against Reproductive and Genetic Engineering. And we made the connection between the pro-fertility technologies and the anti-fertility technologies. And that these are the capitalist patriarchal institutions that are making women's bodies as their market. And Vandana, you have come to one of the first FinRage meeting in 1989, where Renata and Maria was there, and you spoke about GMOs even at that time, Paula Bradish, and you spoke about that. And we really, many people thought that what it is not even an issue at that time. But we talked that we found a link between not only the population control policies, one on its own, the Green Revolution was also part of the World Bank prescriptions to the third world countries, and so that they can use all the leftover chemicals, to make pesticides and fertilizers after World War II. And so our soil, land, seeds, water became their market. So by 1990, we were already in agriculture and we started Naya Krishi Andolan. It means new agriculture movement, a farmers movement with a small scale, very small farmers, and who could not at that time were able to cope with cost of imports like buying fertilizer and pesticides. So they were quite helpless at that time. So in search of the alternatives, farmers came together and we talked about biodiversity-based ecological farming. And so many wanted to have some alternative to chemical fertilizer. But the story with the women was different. Women said, no, that's not the only problem. The modern agriculture is totally male-biased, market-oriented, environmentally destructive. And one thing I still remember in the beginning, they said, modern agriculture destroyed our bodies. In Bangla, they said, Amar deho nashto koreche. And that meant that my body is destroyed by chemicals and all these harmful inputs. So they meant, by body, they meant water, seed, birds, insects, butterflies, even earthworms, everything that was around them. So then women were also upset with another thing, that Bangladesh, actually farmers produce rice diversity, as Vandana has mentioned, that we in Bangladesh, we have 15,000 rice varieties, but modern agriculture started promoting few varieties called ERI 11, ERI 30, ERI 50, as against the local varieties which are wonderfully named called Hijol Diga, Tulshi Mala, Batsha Bhog, Ratar Bolo, with all these lovely names. So farmers were really not able to grow these anymore, were not encouraged to grow. So these were disappearing. So Naya Krishi, one of the initial tasks of Naya Krishi became to collect these lost varieties, endangered varieties, and also those which has special qualities of resisting against flood and drought. So there was this effort. So hybrid and HYV seeds, farmers started rejecting and started collecting, and we started to have seed wealth center. We call it community seed wealth center. It is part of Naya Krishi seed network, which means that farmers would have their own seed in their own houses, and then there will be a seed hut in the villages, in their environment, and then there is a common seed, community seed center. And I remember again in 1994 when we organized festivals, because festivals are one way of making farmers interact with each other, share their knowledge. So Jahanara, a farmer, said, you know, she was for the first time in front of 5,000 people, and she said in a very nervous way, "Sisters, don't let the seeds go out of your hands." And that was so powerful that we later on made another slogan from that: "Sisters, keep seeds in your hands." So the farmer seed system was very important. And at present, I just want to share that we have 2,247 rice varieties in our collection. So many 399 varieties of vegetables, pulses, 61 spices. If you talk about brinjal, we have 30 varieties. If you talk about chilies, we have 40 varieties. So that kind of thing. This is one field of a few small scale farmers. And they have so many different crops together. And in this, you know, they are harvesting and also planting. And among them, what I'm going to talk about soon, is the uncultivated crops, you know. So the farmers maybe cultivate this red spinach, but in between, some other plants are growing on its own, and it finds its environment to grow on its own, and it is safe. And poor people, poor women have the right to take it, even if the land does not belong to her. Yeah, these are the different shark, you know, sad, as Vandana would know. And these are the uncultivated. These are not cultivated by anyone. These are grown on their own in water bodies or in cultivated fields or anywhere in different places. And Bangladesh has a culture of, you know, growing food, not the New Year. We don't celebrate New Year. We actually celebrate the last day of the year, that is called Chaitra Sankranti. And on that day, women go out to find at least 14 different shawls from their surroundings. And that is kind of natural auditing if their environment is safe or it is giving enough food to them. And here I'm showing these two pictures. This is called Gima shawl, and Gima is very bitter tasted shawl. And it is said that village women believe that if you have Gima in April or in the summer period, it gives you protection against diseases. And so you must take it, but you have to find it. So, but Corolla, bitter gourd, is also bitter tasted, which you need to also eat. But many poor women may not have this land to grow Corolla. But she can find Gima very easily if she goes around. And so that means the nature gives these people the source of their protection against diseases. And from these, you know, all these charts that I'm showing, many of these are so medicinal. These have nutritional content. These have, medicinal, and women know exactly which is needed when. And so they use all these things. Fighting against GMOs, for example, golden rice. So we could argue with them that we don't need golden rice because all these salts that we have shown has all these vitamins that we need for our bodies. So, and also we are fighting against BT brinjal, and Vandana and Susan and everybody, we are fighting it together. And I think our fight will go on and we will be working together. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Shiva, maybe could you tell us more about your work? I know you do a similar work in India.
Yeah, so, as was mentioned, I'm trained in physics. And even in physics, we know everything is interconnected. And nothing is fixed. There's nothing like essential properties. So sexism is just wrong anyway, because it is not the case. Women are inferior, blacks are inferior, indigenous people are inferior. All those are constructs. And we will not be able to really have freedom for all life on earth and freedom for all human beings on earth without dismantling the constructions of the age of colonialism and the age of capitalist patriarchy. Why did I end up working on, of course, I became an ecologist very early. I joined the beautiful movement as a volunteer, even while I was doing my PhD, the movement of women who came out and hugged the trees in my region and said, these are our mothers. They gave us soil and water and pure air, not timber and profits. And the Chipko movement eventually got a logging ban. So for 10 years, we were fighting all the time to protect the forests as the providers of life, not the generators of profits. We have the power to recognize we are part of nature, and there is no power bigger than that. That act of doing Chipko, of hugging the tree, stop the loggers. Yeah? And every time there's been a hugging between the attacker and the destroyer and those who love nature, the axe has had to go, the bulldozer has had to go, and most importantly, the colonization of the mind has got defeated because the violence stands naked and brute. It was 1984. Punjab, where I had done my MSc honors in particle physics, erupted in violence. 30,000 people were killed in those few years, and the military was sent to the Golden Temple. And that same year, on 2nd of December, a pesticide plant leaked in the city of Bhopal. And I was working then for the United Nations University on conflicts over natural resources. And I said, there's something going on here, but they're not typical people fighting people, This is a bigger conflict, a deeper conflict, and I want to study it. So I wrote my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. And that's when I realized that industrial agriculture was really nothing but continuation of Hitler's war after the wars had ended. Every chemical in industrial farming is a descendant of the chemicals that were generated then by the IG Farben working with the Monsantos and the DuPont. So, the Americans and the Allies were fighting against Hitler, but the companies were working together to create the poisons and create the profits and the control. So the experiment of extermination is where these chemicals began. And they have continued with industrial agriculture. And, just like Farida was showing those lovely images, years ago in Bangalore, on a very big wall, there was a signboard of Monsanto saying, liberate yourself, use Roundup, and was showing those greens that are the necessary part of our health and diet, as if it was an imprisonment. And Roundup, as the advertisements of Monsanto say, it kills everything green it comes in contact with. And then, of course, they created the GMOs. And the first generation of GMOs were Roundup-resistant crops that you would spray more Roundup, 15-fold increase, 1,500% increase in America. And Bt toxin crops like the Bt eggplant that we rejected and had a moratorium, and Bill Gates then took it to Bangladesh. We had the golden rice thrown out of India, and Bill Gates took it to Erie. And Erie, because Farida mentioned the rices, what is Erie? International Rice Research Institute. Why was it created? We had all the rices. India, which in Pakistan, Bangladesh was part of India, our peasants had evolved 200,000 rices from one wild grass, or rices. And we give them names that tell you what the rice is. Basmati from our valley is an aromatic rice. the flood-resistant rices, the halter-resistant, it's in the name. The farmers knew they were breeding. And then the chemical warfare system decided, they used an opportunity of a drought in India and forced this green revolution. The word green, which is our word, the word for life, was usurped then in the 60s by the Green Revolution, and is being usurped now by the so-called green economy. But this is the green of greed, it's the green of money. It is not the green of life. The Green Revolution took the seeds of the farmers. The World Bank was financing. Rockefeller, USA, they took these seeds and then put them in these CGAIR systems, Consultative International Group of International Agricultural Research. And this, then, now, this year, these 780,000 collections from farmers, Gates is getting control of it. He's the biggest funder. Just like he's the biggest funder of WHO, he's the biggest funder now of the CG system, which means he controls the seeds. Then the Monsantos brought the GMOs, Roundup resistant, Bt toxin, all failed. Gates now is pushing the next GMOs, treating life, which is complex, self-organized, intelligent, as if it's a word program you can cut and paste. And all the research is showing that you cut one gene, you get 1,500 other places where the genes get scrambled. Because it is an interconnected living system. It's not a Lego game. It is not a word program. And then Gates is financing the undoing of the laws we put in place. I worked very hard at the Convention on Biological Diversity. We put in place laws for safety to assess GMOs. And I was appointed by the UN on the expert group to make that framework, which became the Cartagena Protocol. He has spent 70 million in Europe to dismantle the biosafety laws and let these new GMOs go unregulated. And they want to call them natural to fool the public. But on the other hand, we also fought against the patenting of seed. And that's why I started Navdanya. And that's why Farida saves seeds, because we do not believe seeds are a machine. Seeds are not an invention. Monsantos and the corporations are not the creators of the seed. The seed makes itself. Women farmers have evolved seeds further. And this is common property, it's the commons. So in India, we managed to make laws that said plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions and therefore cannot be patented. And since that time, I've been fighting Monsanto in court because they constantly challenge this law. Algorithms are just reading the map. And my mind went down to the colonizers who said when they came to India, we came with a sword in one hand and a yardstick in the other, because colonizers make maps. On a piece of paper, they make maps. That's what they did to the country in Australia. That's what they did. And they divided India, making a map of the partition. A Britisher was brought to just make a line to divide Farida from me, to divide Pakistan and India. My mother became a refugee. And today's lines are digital lines. But interestingly, the digital lines are not just lines of creation of property. They are also lines of turning us into raw material. They are the digital chains. So I have a little book which I did with an Ayurvedic practitioner. It's called The Two Futures of Food, Health and Humanity. And because the group that published it could not, it was lockdown time, it's available on Amazon, sadly Amazon. But I've analyzed 3 patterns which show where the billionaires, the patriarchs want to take us. Pattern number 1, impossible food. So golden rice is one, when we don't need it, but fake meat burgers, fake breast milk, Gates is financing fake lab breast milk as a climate solution. Tell me, I mean, if he can stretch women's bodies in this distortion, we really need a stronger voice together. And I would say to Susan, let us reactivate FinRage in times of the global empire of Gates. For those who want to know more about the Gates empire, read my book, Oneness versus 1%. Also read a report called Gates to a Global Empire. Second patent, all those greens that Farida showed, They give you iron, they give you vitamin A. Women who are eating that will never have anemia. But because you spray Roundup, women have anemia. We know the colonizers decided the Aboriginals don't count, wipe them out. Indigenous people don't count, wipe them out. Local cultures don't count, wipe them out. The women don't count, kill them as bitches. We know this culture has grown from a genocidal instinct. So if they're now saying, our algorithms will value you, do you think they will leave any human being place to live? If they can't leave the grass alone, they can't leave the insect alone. Femicide is already such a violent reason for women dying. So we are in a whole new moment, and there's a whole new challenge to us. The beauty is we've always organized with very little money, lots of love.
Susan, to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to speak about three things in this section. One is the sex trade, climate catastrophe is the next one, and billionaires is the third. On the sex trade, I mean, what is so terrifying is that the sex trade is the third largest trade market in the world, after weapons and drugs. So if you can imagine just how many women's bodies are being used in the sex trade around the world every day, every week, every month, every year, it is really quite horrifying. And the problem is that there are movements to legalize, or even worse, decriminalize the sex trade, which just allows anything to happen. You know, there are no laws at all if you decriminalize it. And the prostitution creates despair, it creates ill health, many women are murdered, and it just goes on. It has horrendous impacts, not only on the women in the sex trade, but when they leave, it has impact on the next generation, and so on. And just as there's transgenerational trauma amongst Indigenous peoples because of the dreadful things that have been done to them, there is also transgenerational trauma amongst women who have been in the sex trade and who somehow have managed to escape it. And it takes enormous courage and enormous determination to do that. And as I mentioned before, surrogacy is also increasing, and poor women are being turned into breeders. And as Kaiser Eckersekman said, that surrogacy is babies without sex, and prostitution is sex without babies, although that's not quite true, because of course some of the women do become pregnant, but that's the sort of concept of it. And I think that, you know, the movements to abolish the sex trade altogether need to be as strong as the movement to abolish capitalist patriarchy, the seed companies, the Monsantos, the Bayers, who's now bought Monsanto. And so Monsanto has just been deflected off the page as if it doesn't exist, but of course it does. The climate catastrophe. Now, in Australia, we have had a series of climate catastrophes, but probably the worst was the summer of 2019 and 20. In that year, there were so many, the fires went for 6 months. They started in Brisbane because the fire season starts earlier in Queensland. The fire season starts earlier in Queensland, and then they went down the coast. I was writing my book Vortex at the time, and I was trying to write stuff about what was going on. And every day I looked up the figures, and the numbers just kept going up and up. By the end of March in 2020, 18.6 million hectares were burnt out. And that's a horrifying figure. It is a huge area of land. And what surprised me was that it was more than had been burnt out in the Amazon by several times. The only good thing to come out of it is that although it's been known for several decades about cultural burning which Indigenous people have been doing for some 65,000 years. Until the fires, nobody really took much notice. And there has since then been more discussion, because what happens is the national parks people go out into forests and they do what's called backburning. But often these backburning things are the things that start the fires in the first place. And because they don't understand how cultural burning operates, they do the wrong thing. It's a bit like having a blowtorch and blasting a pile of paper, whereas the cultural burning is very specific. They burn small plants, they burn them in particular areas, they burn them at particular times of the year, and these, I think, are absolutely critical. Now, the other thing is about the billionaires, and thank you, Vandana, for your book, Oneness, and how much of that is fabulous. But the other name that we all need to know is George Soros. I mean, George Soros has his finger in so many pies. The main one is in promoting prostitution, giving money to organisations who are trying to decriminalise prostitution. But he also has fingers in many other pies. He has fingers in the transgender lobby, really affecting the way that the UN talks about things and the way in which women are being written out of the language. You know, I don't know if you're aware of it, but in the transgender lobby language, women have front holes. I mean, technically it's wrong anyway, but, you know, and women chest feed. So immediately there is a denial of women's bodies in this particular male-centered lobby. And the billionaires are also funding that. There's a huge number of them, and I write about it in my book Vortex. And I connected, Vandana, I don't have it right in front of me, but I connect it to the way in which you talk about the financing of climate change and the drugs and the chemicals that are used and so forth. So I think these things all run together. There is a lot of misogyny that runs through absolutely all of this. And I think that's, for me, the three things that I will just keep on working on somehow. And I've been involved in a program to protect the local area from having a helicopter base. Now, where we live is in the wet tropics World Heritage Area. So it is protected by the UN, and the southern cassowary is a threatened species. And it lives up here, and occasionally we see them just wandering around. The Indigenous Jiru people of this area have a saying, no wabu, no wuju, no gundi. No forest, no food, no cassowary. And the reason for that also is that the cassowary eats fruit and disperses it throughout the forest, creating a virtuous circle of renewability. So the cassowary eats the fruit, it disperses the fruit, and then the fruit in turn feeds the cassowary the next time round. And Mission Beach, where we live, is a biodiversity hotspot. And my key argument against this building of a helicopter base is that it will destroy the biodiversity that makes this area so special.
Would you like to say something more about how your passion for ecology from a feminist perspective emerged?
Yes. Farida and Vandana and Maria Mies were probably the three most important people, because I went to Bangladesh in 1993 and as part of a conference with Renata as well. Well, I think I went for 5 days. I spent several days in a group with Maria Mies, and I learned about what you were doing, Maria. I learned about your work, Vandana, although I had heard you speak in Barcelona at the book fair, Feminist book fair. And out of that, I wrote a three-page, very short manifesto called the Wild Politics Manifesto. And that was what got me going. And I had, there were lots of things I hadn't thought about before, but I decided I did need to know and understand about economics. So I think that's what got me going. And I have to thank everybody who was at that conference, especially Farida for organising it, for changing my life.
Well, thank you, Susan. I think now it's time for the Q&A because this panel is soon coming to an end. And actually, we had a question from the audience asking, how did you all meet and where have you been able to work together?
When the WTO was established, we created Diverse Women for Diversity, because I said they want the world to be a monoculture. And my dear friend Jean, who is no more, who's passed on, and Beth Burrows, we basically on a napkin drafted the manifesto, and it's available on the Navdanya website in the Diverse Women for Diversity page, our original declaration. And then Maria Mies and I wrote at the Leipzig conference in 96, I think it was, or 95, on women and agriculture and women and food security. And then Farida was there in the food summit in Rome.
Yes.
And this is before digital, this is before click a button kind of manner. 100,000 women from around the world signed a document saying, we will keep food sovereignty and security in our hands. And I would say we will keep the knowledge of how to grow healthy food, what our bodies are about. When Susan talked about the language being introduced in UN treaties, you can see it's basically doing exactly to women's bodies what's being done to plants and seeds. Turn them into parts and then move them around and take intellectual property at every level, and all integrity, self-organization, autonomy taken out. So it is really, in my view, at this point, the ecofeminist movement is really about diversity, autonomy, self-organization, freedom for all life and well-being, versus the billionaires wanting to reduce everything, which they or anyway treated as an object, but now an object to be reduced to pieces for making their next level of intellectual property and their next economy. I have been going to Mexico for supporting them for protecting their corn, but also fighting GMO corn. And there was a public hearing where I was on the jury, and an economist laid out that because of free trade, because of NAFTA, 1/3 of the economy of Mexico had been destroyed. And that 1/3 had moved into drugs and the sex industry, because people still find a way. So the more we destroy the living economies that women create, which are not counted as economies, we are going to see, I mean, already in India, with the lockdown, we are seeing people are selling their children. The sex trade has increased. Of course, that's not what gets counted. It takes feminists like Susan to bring these issues out. So the violation of the Mother Earth's body is the ecological crisis, violation of our bodies in all their multiple forms. And the problem is that there's money to be made in these violations.
Farida actually has a wonderful quote that you said in 2002. I can't remember exactly where, but you said you were talking about Naya Krishi Andolon, the new agricultural movement and farming for happiness. You said the main capital is not cash, but farmers' knowledge. It's about restoring culture in agriculture. And I think that that's really profound. I think it's a terribly important thing to keep remembering.
You are talking about sex trade and trafficking. We also did one study where we found that the villages where there is food insecurity, farmers have no more, they cannot do farming anymore. From those villages, more girls can be trafficked with promises of false promises of jobs and marriages. But another thing, Vandana, you must also have noticed maybe, that the ready-made garment workers, these young girls who are coming out of the villages, are actually a product of the destruction of agriculture in the villages. that their families are no more able to sustain, and they are letting their daughters go out of the village and take any kind of, it's like slavery to them, you know, and they're dying in burning and collapse. And final thing I want to just, Vandana, tell you that whether you remember, you, Maria, and I, we went to Maria's village when you were writing the ecofeminism book. And we stayed maybe 2 nights together in the village, and Maria was doing her, gardening. And every time we were constantly talking about all these issues. And that was such a good time for me. And I always remember, and we were cooking rice and dal and everything. So that was very important. Yes.
One more thing, because of the reminder of what Farida has said about the garment industry. You know, we are being the non-thinkers of the world are writing rubbish like this. There was one book written by Jeffrey Sachs, who's destroyed so many countries while he was in the IMF World Bank. Jeffrey Sachs actually wrote a book on ending poverty, and he says the women in the garment industry they're taking the first step to development. That their life in the villages is brute and poor. And so they already define you into poverty to then define the exploitation as liberating you from poverty. And that's how they have taken abundance away from every culture. They took away the abundance of the Aboriginal Australians and defined poverty, then created poverty. They've done this again and again and again. You know, that what we are, what we choose to be, are cultures of care for the land. That is primitiveness. So please become our slave to be liberated. So they sell the slavery as liberation. That's colonialism.
Yes. And I mean, one of the other things that we have to do is we actually have to dismantle patriarchy. Now, you know, this is not going to happen overnight. But I also think it's really important to recognize that in order to change the world and societies, we have to be able to visualize it, to imagine the world operating in a different way. And obviously there are going to have to be enormous shifts in power relations across race and ethnic lines, as well as for people with disabilities. And I think maybe one of the really good things we could aim for is to allow elder women to have more say.
Yes.
Anybody over 60.
Yes.
I think we have a vision, we have a practice. We just have to become stronger through solidarity.
Our current society is clearly inspired by money and violence, but money is really at the core of it. Because if you are inspired by money, then you want to do things like bomb other people so you can get their riches. You want to colonize them. You want to get in and create new biotechnology, even if you know it's going to fail, because when it fails, it'll be another business opportunity. Whereas if you are inspired by biodiversity, for a start, you cannot drop bombs. It is very, very bad for the environment. And you can't create biotech. What biodiversity does is that it creates a way of making the world sustainable. And it means that you actually have to care for and look after your local areas, which is what Vandana and Farida are both doing. And in my small way with the cassowaries, I'm trying to do that as well. So I think creating an inspiration for biodiversity is a helpful way to getting it down there, and an inspiration for gynocentric societies as well, just to add that in.
I would like to just add that, you know, the groups who are working, and I want to reiterate again the need for FinRage to, you know, to be active again. And, you know, even if it is a small group, you know, but they are doing, I think we have to really strengthen any groups who are working against environmental destruction, these biotech industries. And, we have to support each other. We have to have solidarity relationship with each other. And I think one doable thing is very much that we, for example, in a country like Bangladesh and India, we can connect ourselves with the rural women, farmer women. I think their leadership should come forward, and we have so much to learn from them. And if we can make them stronger, and if we, like also we can replace the corporate market, and with the farmers market, and those things are doable. And I think Vandana has shown whatever scale of operation it is, but it is actually changing people's minds. So I think that task we have to take on, and it is doable. And I cannot shake hands with you all, but I want to shake hands with Vandana, Susan, and all of our FiLiA members to say that we are all together and we have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. So the panel discussion has now come to an end, and I'd really like to thank Farida, Dr. Shiva, and Susan for this wonderful discussion. Your work is an inspiration to all the women fighting against patriarchy and every person fighting for Mother Earth. So we'll now end on a few lines from one of Susan's poem. And the poem is called Yuganta Megha, and it was published in 2008. Yuganta Megha is a Sanskrit word meaning a gathering of clouds at the end of an epoch. A yug is an epoch, and according to the Hindu cosmology, we're currently living in the Kali Yuga, which is also the epoch of destruction. Susan, would you like to go ahead?
Yuganta Megha. At the end of every cosmic cycle, at the end of a generation, Yuganta Megha. Clouds congregate, gathering souls for the next yuga. Cloud breath, soul mist, rasping winds, rattling bones. Here come the galloping horses, humans astride their flanks. Here come the thundering clouds, breaking the world apart. The Hercules moth climbs every building, rising upwards through 110 floors, scaling the earth to find the moon, that light in the sky through which he might escape Earth's pull, melt into the inferno of light. And that is in my book called Earth's Breath. Thank you.